Alright, should be good to go. Hello, hello. I think it's been like a week or so since the last update. Two things that I kind of want to go over today. It's a bit of a late stream, but I want to talk about data optimization, which should be the title of this. And I also want to kind of give an update on how the skill trees are coming along. It's been a lot of organization of data from like past systems that I've basically torn apart and recreated. So it's been honestly more effort to kind of break down and reuse old code. And if I would have just like made this from scratch, it probably would have been a lot quicker to do all this. But I noticed a lot of my old code from 200 days ago at this point, probably more than that. I was actually storing a lot of the data inside the widgets itself, which is terrible in most cases. So it got me thinking about like kind of like explaining good methods of data optimization and like where to store it and like what classes to put it on more so for multiplayer specifically. But right now we basically have this all working. What I basically did was make it so it shows what it's actually going to be upgrading, and it basically displays all of the data in real time. I don't have to like hard code like anything. I realistically don't have to type in descriptions for any of the data either. Whenever I add like a new effect or anything, I go into my table. Let's just do this one. I'll just add in an effect. I will select what abilities this skill or this like passive from the skill tree will affect. So if I just like select like a couple here that like it'll increase damage to, I can type in what part of the ability is it going to affect. So the effect itself is damage or healing. Radius is like the AoE of the effect. Period is like the frequency. If it is like a ticking effect, duration, obviously it increases the duration based on if it is a duration effect and if it can allow it. So we have like override, multiply, and add. Override is probably going to get taken out, but what I really like realistically just want to show is if I just change a couple of values here and do like a multiply and set this to like 2, or let's just say 5. I just need to link this to a specific tag, because this basically works off of gameplay tags. And I'm just going to leave this blank, maybe put like an A or something in it, just to kind of mark that this is the one that we actually modified. Set that to effect. I'm going to get rid of this old one here. Save it. And launch in. But what should happen is with the actual tag that we have linked to this, it should automatically update the text for us. Unless I didn't actually just save that. I love how I did this like 20 times and now it's not working. Isn't that fun? I'm definitely missing something. Let's try it this way. I'm just going to change this to like 3. And that before said 200%, now it should just say 300%. Yeah. There must be something with the tag. It was looking for the old one or something. I don't know. All I know is I did that like 20 times and it worked. But regardless, like what I really want to talk about is like where to store data and everything. Turn my AC on real quick. So with multiplayer, not getting into like replication because that's probably for another day. Like there's multiple classes that a player has that you can store data like on, right? Like you got your base like character class. You got player state. Let's just type in player controller. We got game state. We got game instance. Am I missing anything important? I think these are the core ones. If I think of any, I'll add on. But we have these guys here. Where should you put like certain types of data? Well, I'll make a little drop down here. I guess like a bullet point, kind of explaining like what the significance of each one is. We have game state. There's only one of these. And it's shared. Shared between all players. That means whatever data that you actually set on this, whether it be like variables or data tables, anything like that, there's only one instance of it. Now the thing is, with replication, if you change values on this and it's not a replicated variable, it doesn't automatically update that and synchronize it between every single player. You would actually have to mark it as a replicated property. Game state is a good spot to actually host your like const data, so like data tables and everything. So I'm just gonna put data tables. I'm not gonna make this thing like crazy long, but data tables, data assets can go on the game state. It's a good spot to basically hold like a universal form of information. Now, what's the difference between like a game instance and game state? They both basically do the same thing. A game instance realistically should be used probably for like single player games more than anything else. I like for multiplayer specifically, I like putting everything onto a game state because it allows the server to have complete authority over everything. A game instance, a client has its own authority over this, and it makes cheating a little bit easier. For character and player state and player controller, one thing to keep in mind with multiplayer and, you know, thinking in the context of multiplayer games, player state, put this here. A player state is something or an actor that is known to all players in a game, meaning like server and clients, right? A player controller, however, I gotta space these out a little bit better. Player controller is only known to the actual owning client and the server itself. This is like a good spot to put just like UI information and stuff like that. There's also a HUD as well, which is something I use, but it's kind of getting like pushed out of Unreal Engine. Like a lot of people just store stuff on player controller at this point, but that's besides the point. Player state is a great place to put data that needs to be replicated and rep notified to basically like all clients. So a lot of the stuff that I put on the player state is pretty much like any type of data that needs to be known by everybody else in a game. So if I go to, just to give like an example of this, if I go to my player state, I have something called assigned class trees. So this is basically like all the classes that a character will be assigned during the actual game itself. This needs to be known to basically all clients because this rep notify here will give visual like updates to all other players when you switch to a specific class tree. What game are you making? I am making a first-person MOBA game. So it's like a spell-slinging first-person game. Right now we're just talking about like data and where to store it for multiplayer games. Just try to keep everything like centralized, so it's a lot easier to maintain it all. Yeah, player state is good for universal information that needs to be replicated to all clients. Player controller, however, is only for like UI updates. And any type of like client-side RPCs are good to put onto a player controller. So for player controller here, I don't know why the alignment keeps defaulting like that, but hey. We also have the A character here as well. This is also not like a scripted thing. I was more so just going over this, kind of just like freestyling it. Just because for the past like week or two, I've just been doing a ton of organization with data, and I've done a lot of research on all this shit. So I'm kind of just sharing what I found, or what I've been doing for the past like couple months. Character, you should just treat this shit, honestly, like... Honestly, this thing should just be like a puppet. You do not want to keep data, like important information, on an A character. The only thing that is like useful for like A character is you can use this as like kind of like a hub for information, where like it's a router pretty much. And what I mean by that is the character class that I have for the game, I basically transformed it into something that is just like a component manager. So this will allow me to just route data, or like route function calls and everything to certain components that I have on this character, using interfaces and function libraries. I typically don't, of course, I'd hit debug mode and kill that. Press F11 instead of F12. Yeah, I basically just use this thing as like a router. I don't really keep like any game sensitive information on this at all. And I try to keep this as like dynamic as possible. I think the only type of data I keep on this has to do with like the death of the character, like any visual updates and stuff like that. But besides that, it's pretty much just like a router to other components that are constructed on this thing. And that's it. The majority of the data that I do need is kept onto the actual player state itself. So that's pretty much where I have everything moved to at this point. And it just makes it a lot easier to work with it this way. Main reason is because when you get into a game, right, and say you need to access some important information that's on another player, well, what if that player died, or what if their character is in like a, you know, is in queue to be destroyed, something like that, like it's null, right? There are a couple like guarantees, quote unquote, in Unreal Engine with player states and player controllers. Player states are going to be assigned to every single player that is actually in a game, and they actually will technically live past the player leaving for 30 seconds, I think is the default, or something like that. So you can almost guarantee that you'll always have access to a player state, and you'll be able to pull information off of a player state. Whereas with a character, if your character dies and gets destroyed, you could be accessing a null pointer, and that just causes a bunch of problems. Now, with that being said, if there's stuff that you do need to access onto a character, what I would recommend doing is actually routing any of those calls through a player state and using like the get pawn on a player state, while also using like interfaces too. Obviously, if you're doing this, always check for if the pawn is null before you do anything on it. But you just want to make safe casts to this kind of data. What else? Oh, with data. Let me give an example, because I don't think I did. For game states and keeping all your data pretty much like centralized and const on a game state. I have something, or an interface that I made called global data. And what this does is it uses a T array of data that was pulled out of a data table and stored onto the game state itself. I basically just use this as a const reference to any information that it should be globally accessible to every single player. So this is obviously something that stores like all their spells and class data. I have other things that store like status effect data as well. So basically anything that just needs to be like known to everybody, but you don't want any player to actually change stuff on this. For single player, you can actually put all this stuff onto like a game instance. For multiplayer, I like keeping it here. Multiplayer, you obviously have to worry about cheating and everything, so keeping like anything on a game instance is generally bad from what I've seen. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for places to store things. What's also really nice about using interfaces as well is you can make function libraries. So I just made a custom header file, and I named it U Global Data Function Library. And what this allows me to do is from anywhere in my project, I don't have to include the whole game state itself. I can just include this function library and pass in a pointer to the actual game state. What this will then do is it'll use that pointer, which I know the game state will almost always be valid. If it ever actually isn't, we have a problem. We pass it in here, and this will actually just call or cast to that interface and pull the data off. So this is a pretty good method to do this. It centralizes everything, and it forces you to put everything onto data tables or data assets, which coming from just moving everything off of blueprints, it's an absolute blessing to have all your data centralized like this. Before, to change anything on any of the abilities, you'd have to, or I'd have to go in and directly modify the variables on each spell, and in doing so you have to open up every goddamn blueprint to do it. But with data tables, all I have to do is just open up the spell tree, and I have access to control every single part of the actual ability itself. Cooldown, cost, damage, everything like that is all here. So it just makes it really easy to have access and control everything in one spot. And you can make changes on the fly, which is phenomenal. What else? There was another point I had with data tables and I can't remember it now. It's going to come to me as soon as I stop streaming. I already know it. So I guess I can probably write up like key takeaways from something like this. Or, better yet, like a TLDR. A TLDR of this would probably be keep as much data on data tables as possible. Would probably be the first thing. Number 2, avoid putting data directly on the character class. Three, do not, oh yeah, that's the other thing about data tables too. Don't, or try to avoid storing like any type of getter functions for data tables on a player state. Reason being is because in multiplayer specifically, you don't share player states. Everybody or every single client makes their own version of a player state. So whenever you call a getter while you're accessing somebody's player state, what it will actually do is make an entire separate copy of that T array onto that player state. Which is terrible, obviously, because you're just like allocating more shit to the heap, which is bad practice. Yeah. Okay, store your data on game state. For multiplayer, game instance for single player. I mean, you can store stuff on game instance for multiplayer, but I've just seen, or I've read about a bunch of problems that can cause, especially if you need to replicate anything. What else? What else? I'm just trying to quickly like fire through everything. Just off the rip. I guess the last thing is pretty much store all data that needs to be shared on the player states. I might actually do like an actual video with a script and everything on this, to provide a little bit more insight, but working with like a bunch of this shit over the past couple months, I wanted to talk about it because every single like forum post that I see, or every article I've read about like data efficiency and optimization for storage, they don't really go into detail about where you should put things and why. It's kind of just like, oh, like you can just like throw that like on the controller or whatever. But I think like giving examples of like certain types of data that you store on certain type of actors that you have access to is like critically important for game development. Because if you centralize all your shit on character and then you realize, oh, wait a minute, there's going to be like 30 different characters in like a match. So that's 30 times the amount of data that you actually need. And then you have to move it onto the game state and then move all your calls to a game or to the game state because you didn't make interfaces or, you know, function libraries. You're in a problem. That's like a month of refactoring alone. So, yeah. I might make something a bit more scripted than this. But with that being said, skill trees are working now. I think, ironically, the worst part is yet to come for this, because now I actually have to type up all of the like skill tree like passives and everything, like all the nodes, and link them to abilities. So I basically just like automated the construction of these things, and now I actually have to do like the technical like hard coding of them. I think there's also a problem with like global modifiers, but that's something else entirely. Oh, I almost forgot about seamless travel. It's like the most important thing with multiplayer. Let me put that up here. This is a huge reason why you'd want to store shit on this. This allows you to essentially store data between travel to worlds and multiplayer. So all the class trees that get assigned to my characters will get stored on the player state. And then what you do is you override something called copy properties. And what this will give you is access to the next player state that you're going to on the map that you're loading in. So all you need to do is just grab it, cast to it, and then set all the variables you currently have to that player state that is going to be on the new world that you're traveling to. And in doing so, it allows you to do stuff like this, where if I select like teams and everything like that, so if I do like my loadout here, I can take all of this data with me to the map that I go to. Which is huge. Yeah, so I have access to all my abilities that I picked between the classes that I just grabbed. I also think the passives themselves now should work too with the skill tree. I think one of them said like 200% damage increase. I forget what ability was on though. Oh no, it has to be this one. Yeah, I also scaled up player, I just crit for like 1,000 damage. I scaled up player health as well, because players were dying way too quickly in the game. Hey Confusion Wood, doing good. I was just giving like a little rundown on data and where to store it. It's kind of like a short late night stream, just kind of going over a couple things. How have you been doing? That's pretty much it with the I think that's pretty much everything I can think of at the moment. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm like super beat from like programming pretty much all day, and this was kind of like a last minute thing that I thought of to do, but I just want to give like very like general and brief overview of where you need to store data, or where you should. If anybody has like any constructive criticism on anything that I've said, feel free to let me know. I think it would be a good discussion to bring up on where you guys store data and why, and all the reasoning behind it. But this is like kind of like my compendium, whatever you want to call it, on best practices that I've found so far, but you know, still learning in a sense. But yeah, with that being said, I should be streaming tomorrow, and I'm actually going to be doing like a lot of debugging on the skill tree stuff. I made a bunch of different types of data to store all of these skill tree information, so it's going to be a lot of debugging that needs to happen. So yeah, what time am I streaming tomorrow? Up for debate. Probably, I would imagine around like 12:30 Eastern, but we'll see what happens. Depends how late I stay up doing this. Yeah, but with that being said, I'll catch you all later. Wherever you are, have a great morning, evening, afternoon, or night, and until tomorrow. Peace.